Hey there. If you've ever felt paralyzed by the pressure to create something important, this episode is for you. Because I'm about to share with you why some of my best creative breakthroughs after 35 years as a professional musician came from projects I almost threw away. As creative people, we all have big dreams, aspirations to do something great. But what if the secret to reaching those heights isn't thinking bigger, it's thinking smaller? Here's what nobody tells you. There's a specific type of creative work that acts like a master key, unlocking the skills you didn't know you needed, building momentum when you're stuck, and sometimes becoming your most important work when you least expect it. If you're new here, I'm so happy you stopped by. Welcome to Keep the Flow, the podcast that looks under the hood of the creative process. I'm Scott, a drummer and composer living way up north in Iceland. After decades of experience in music, design, and writing, I decided to turn my fascination with creativity into a resource for the creatively inclined. Today we're exploring why the creative work that doesn't matter might matter most of all. And that sounds weird, but I'll share the psychological trick that makes starting so easy you'll wonder why you ever struggled with creative block. Why do we put so much pressure on ourselves? I mean, I do it. I'm sure you do it too. Not every project has to be the main thing. Sometimes the detours, the side quests, are the ones that teach you the most. But here's what's interesting about creative side quests. They often disguise themselves as the main road later on. I remember when I first got into graphic design, it wasn't supposed to be a career. I was mainly just curious. This is going way back, but we had Earthlink as a dial-up internet provider, so much better than AOL. And they included web space, so my wife, who is generally much more professional than I am, decided to make herself a website and taught herself HTML. I remember coming home after a rehearsal one night and she's like, "Look, I made a website." And I asked her how she did it, and then I sat down and I made my own website after she had done all the research. And that's how it started, just messing around with fonts and colors. None of it was really for anything, but later, when people started asking us to make websites for them, those experiments suddenly became essential skills I didn't even know I was building. Suddenly, we were paying our rent with that HTML code that Suna showed me. That's the first secret of side quests. They feel like play, but they're actually stealth education. And sometimes, in ways we'll explore in a moment, those side quests become more valuable than the main quest ever was. There's something fascinating about the way small actions create momentum, and there's actually science behind why this works so powerfully for creatives. I've noticed that whenever I record a little melodic fragment, half-finished voice memo on my phone, it keeps calling to me. The incomplete idea somehow sticks in my head longer than the polished songs. It wants me to finish it. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains literally can't let go of tasks left unfinished. But here's where it gets interesting for creatives. You can use this psychological quirk as a creative tool. On the flip side, I've discovered that lowering the bar, telling myself I'll just play for 5 minutes, or I'll just write one sentence, it often leads to much more, because you don't want to stop. It's based on the work of B.J. Fogg from the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. If you make the action small enough, you remove resistance. When you combine these two psychological principles, unfinished fragments that won't leave you alone, and micro actions that makes starting nearly effortless, something magical happens. You create what I call a creative momentum loop. But there's a third element that makes this even more powerful, and it has to do with permission. Low-stakes projects give you something that high-pressure work can't: permission to play. And this permission unlocks a creative state that's almost impossible to access any other way. You and I both know the pressure of trying to make every creative act count. When music became my profession, the pressure crept in gradually. Every rehearsal, every session, every gig started to feel like it had to matter, like it had to move my career forward. But here's what I discovered. Some of my favorite creative moments, the ones that later influenced my most important work, came from things that didn't matter at all at the time. I think about the times I've sat at the drums and just improvised without a goal, no audience, no pressure, and came up with an idea that still feels like part of my musical identity years later. If you've ever sketched something knowing no one would ever see it, that's when play shows up. No audience in mind, no expectations, just curiosity. But here's the paradox I want to explore. Often the work we create when nothing is at stake ends up being exactly what our important work was missing. It's easy to dismiss the small projects as trivial. Our culture certainly does. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful creative forms in history were intentionally tiny, and that this constraint, this apparent limitation, is actually their secret weapon? Haiku distills whole worlds into 3 lines. Some of the best jazz solos I love are just 1 chorus long. Even something like when Instagram was new, photographers had to reimagine composition to fit their little square format. I'm not on Instagram anymore, by the way, but it used to be cool. Anyway, I've tested this myself, composing pieces from everyday household sounds, recording myself just tapping an idea on wine bottles or something, just to see where they'd go. Most don't become full compositions, but every single one strengthens what I call the creative muscle.
All right, enough talk. All we want to do is pump you up. All right, let's move on with the program.
Here's what I've learned. Constraints don't shrink creativity, they sharpen it. And there's a specific way to use constraints that multiplies their power. So whether you're just starting out or you've been creating for decades, small, low-stakes projects aren't just helpful, they might be essential. Think of them as side quests that build skills you didn't know you needed, as psychological tools that create momentum when you're stuck, as safe spaces where play can emerge, as tiny forms that carry surprising creative weight. They may not look like the big dream you're chasing, but they might be the very thing that gets you there. Because sometimes thinking small is the biggest thing you can do for your creativity. If you made it this far, you should probably watch the episode I did about perfectionism next, which you can click on right here. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.